Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. Maya Soman, and here with Bhante Sudasa to my right and Tam Jagaro to my left. Our venerable guest who's staying here at Empty Cloud for a couple of days and has kindly agreed to participate in our monk chat tonight. So whenever you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll try our best to answer them. And in the meanwhile, hello, Maria, Eric, Jayanta, Kumu, Yankee Apple, Jake, Manal, good to see you, friends. And we don't have so far any questions typed in. Hello to Bill. So maybe if the not the venerables, well, some venerables, some venerable at heart, but not officially. If you all have any questions, feel free to bring them up.
There's one online.
But I think someone Erametico had something in mind.
Oh, it's local.
Okay. Hello also to Joseph, and Jake asks, Venerables, I have read that Nibbana is unconditioned, but I struggle to understand what that means. Can you please help explain how this can be, so given the principle of dependent origination?
Well, first off, the Pali word for unconditioned is asankata, which sankata more literally means constructed. So translating it as conditioned is a little bit awkward because that's not actually what the word means. So it's the past participle form of the verb sankaroti, from which we also get the word sankara, which means construct. So sankaroti means to construct something, and sankata therefore means constructed. So nibbana is unconstructed, as in it's not built up out of other things, it's not created from anything, it's not born from anything. So that might be a more useful way of understanding it. So it's always helpful to go back to the Pali terms, especially when dealing with technical terms. If you just go off a single translation, it's often a bit unclear. So how this can be given the principle of dependent origination? Well, nibbana is not part of paticca samuppada. So paticca samuppada is entirely talking about samsara. It's not talking about nibbana at all. So paticca samuppada actually starts off with avijja paccaya sankhara. So when there is ignorance, there are sankharas. So that means, like, literally from step one of paticca samuppada, it's already quite clear this is not talking about nibbana. It's talking about everything else. Did that answer that sufficiently?
Sadhu. Yes, that's excellent. Venerable, would you like to add any other reflections?
Sure. There's a book that comes to mind. If is this Jake? Jake?
Yes.
B. You may be interested in, if you find it at one of, I'm sure they have many of the monasteries around, but it's a book by Ajahn Pasano and Ajahn Amaro called The Island. Mm-hmm. And they actually collect a number of different passages in the suttas, actually talking about nibbana and in particular the practice of stream entry. So if you're very interested in this, it sounds like you are, may be interested in picking up that book if you don't already have it.
Excellent, thank you. You can also find it online, actually.
There you go. I forgot about this. Is the a lot of us have been in a bit of a iron age for the last few years. So I'm catching up.
Actually, I think it's good not to catch up.
Oh, okay.
But
it's already done.
Stay in the iron age.
Yes. And Bill says, can you talk about Sunday's event? Great, I'll take this question. It's easy enough. Yes, so on Sunday we'll have a Katina ceremony here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So some lovely lay people decided to sponsor the Katina ceremony at Empty Cloud and offer the robes and different requisites that the Sangha will need and needs to continue our spiritual practice. So you're all invited to come to the monastery. There will be lots of different activities throughout the day. Yeah, anything else?
What time?
Oh, that's very useful. Thank you. 10 a.m. From 10 a.m. to I believe 4 p.m., 5 p.m., something like that. 4 p.m. Great, thank you. Everybody else knows everything better than I do, which is excellent. Hello, Mary. Good to see you. And hello to Julie as well. Great. We have more questions. And Kumu says, Dear Venerables, do feel free. No, we're not ignoring it. So it is about the translation of the words Ajatam and Bahida. In Majjhima Nikaya 10, it is translated as one's internal body and another's body.
That's too specific. So ajata just means internal, and bahida means external. So translating it as one's internal body and another's body, it's a little too specific. And it's not necessarily just about bodies. So ajata means internal and bahida means external. That's all. The further meaning depends on context.
Okay. Here she also adds in Majjhima Nikaya 138, ajata. Ajatam is for conditions in jhanas, getting stuck internally, and bahida for sixth sense space pleasures.
Yeah, so again, it depends upon the context. So it's like, well, this is internal and that's external. Well, it all depends upon the context. Internal to what? External to what?
Excellent. Okay. And Mani says, how can we apply Dhamma in daily life? Does that happen automatically through wisdom for meditation? And we'll pass this on to Tom Jagara since you kind of hear our answer more often.
Sure, it can. So you definitely can develop wisdom through meditation. And also that things that you do in daily life can help with meditation. So let's say, how can we apply Dhamma in daily life? So one, I think it's actually a very good question, and a lot of times, people are something going on in life that we're struggling with. Let's say, some sort of, I don't know, problem at home, difficulty at work, debts are piling up, or something's going on, neighbors being a nuisance, who knows what's going on. There's all sorts of difficulties or things that happen in life. And how do we apply Dhamma? So one of the sort of conventional way of life is often about like trying to solve a problem, right? You got an annoying neighbor. Let's just how do you deal with the neighbor, or how do you best deal with things at work? And these are all helpful, practical things. But one of the kind of key things about Dhamma and a lot of other kind of spiritual religious practice is actually to look inwards. And of course, what the Buddha wanted us particularly to look at is to look at how suffering arises and what's causing that suffering. What are the circumstances at which it ceases or abates, and then what is the path out of that? Of course, he pointed in particular to the Noble Eightfold Path. So we're not just sort of, just kind of lying off the seat of our pants. So a lot of it is when we're facing a situation is actually trying to apply these principles. So this, looking at suffering and the end of suffering is just, one kind of framework, but there's many other Dhamma principles one can apply. I like it just because it's very core to what the Buddha is trying to teach and point at, and I think it's actually really helpful because often the kind of conventional way of looking at things is to externalize problems, externalize suffering. If this other person were different, or if my job were different, or if I didn't have these debts, then I'd be happy, right? So it's always something along those lines. And the Dhamma perspective is actually to investigate, well, what actually is the suffering here? What's actually going on? And so, and that is asking us to look more deeply. And so with respect to meditation, I think one of the really helpful things about meditation, for no other, I mean, there's lots of good things about meditation, but one I think core things about meditation is it helps us be a little bit less reactive, right? And a little bit more present to what's going on. So we're building that muscle memory, that habit of not immediately reacting to things that we're coming in contact with in daily life. And so as we come in contact with something, the more that we have that muscle memory or that practice or that memory, oh, wait a minute, I'm a practitioner, but don't necessarily just kind of go with the habitual reaction, and then we can pause, and then we can use our mindfulness and our sort of good judgment to navigate a different way, given what we see as the options available to us. So I hope this can give us a few things, and I don't know if any other venerables had any other thoughts.
That was great.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And Martin says, I would love to learn more about Buddha meditation. We already spoke about it. So I don't chant the word Buddha, do I? It's more, I think of it, I speak it to myself silently. And Bud, the first syllable, it's when breathing in. The second, when breathing out. Could you show me how you do it? Or could we do it together for 2 minutes or so? Would be so great. I'll also pass this on to you, since we get this question rather often, and I think it would be good to hear your perspective.
Oh boy, I haven't done this meditation too much, Venerable, have you?
Did a little bit when I was in the very early stages of my practice, but I actually never really took to it. But there's many different styles, so there's not a single right way. So the basic idea is that you have the word Buddha, and you're repeating that word over and over in your mind. So you mentioned one way, which is to synchronize it with your breathing, but you can also just repeat the word over and over in your mind without it being connected to the breathing. I actually found that much more effective during the brief time I was using this meditation. I just repeat Buddha, Buddha, Buddha in my mind without connecting it to the breathing at all. That's really all there is to it. It's a very simple meditation method. Just repeat the word Buddha in your mind over and over again. That's it.
Great, thank you, Venerables. And Bill says, is Venerable Chanda stopping in at Empty Cloud on her way back to England? Most likely. I see that you're very well informed, Bill. Insider information. And Venerables Joseph says, Venerables, I remember hearing that one should not try to meditate when sick, but I've also heard that meditating can help one through a sickness. Can you opine? I would say that every time is a good time to meditate, and actually many times we'll be sick. So if we start picking and choosing and then we actually get really, really sick, then what does that mean? We stop practicing? No. We're sick, we practice. We're healthy, we practice. We're in between, we practice. We're tired, we practice. Like, it's always a good time for practicing. And it's very important to understand actually what sickness even is, what illness feels like. Not what we think about it, but actually your experience. So actually the most difficult experiences that we have become very actually interesting when we take the time to explore them experientially through meditation practice, formal meditation practice, and also meditation practice as we go throughout our day. Anything else that the Venerables want to share?
I was just going to say, when I'm sick, I find it one of the most productive times, reflecting on impermanence and impermanence of the body, and also unfortunate of death. Thinking there's going to be a time where I get sick and I'm not getting better.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very productive time, actually.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sonira Metico. It's good. The Rainbow says, when I learned of Tibetan Buddhism and its wrathful deities, I feel that I was searching for something within Buddhism to justify a more aggressive approach against evil. But in learning the symbolism behind these deities, I think that they are meant to be wrathful to reproach those who are seeking something other than peace or nonviolence as the answer. Is this view correct? So that's what.
To be honest, I'm not an expert on the symbolism that's used in Tibetan Buddhism, so I'm really not the best person to ask.
Me neither.
Wondering anybody here at the monastery knows. I mean, I could take a guess, but I'd rather not because I'd just be guessing.
We actually do have some wrathful deities represented upstairs, and actually, I think it was Ayya Brahmavara who gave a really good explanation of that. I don't think too much about it, but I think actually when we have a Tibetan monastic, maybe you can have that. You can ask that question, because we would be just a little bit more in the realm of speculation or hearsay rather than it being our personal practice. And Manal says, I will also jump on the too technical train. Bhattisuddhasa, I thoroughly enjoyed your review of the Vinha Sutta. You described that forming judgment may actually be a healthy practice. Would you please help me understand if the Buddha advised on having discretion or judgment? Well, this is directly.
It is directed towards me, but I'm also interested in hearing what my venerable companions have to say on this topic. But yeah, briefly speaking, I would say that judgment is a function of wisdom. So being able to judge what is wholesome and what is unwholesome is a very important part of wisdom. So when we talk about judgmentalism in non-Buddhist contexts, we're normally talking about it in the kind of harsh way that we criticize other people. But that's in a Buddhist context. When I hear the word judgment, I'm thinking more in terms of evaluating the wholesomeness or unwholesomeness of a particular choice. And that, in my mind, is an aspect of wisdom, and therefore is a positive thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, that's how I've sort of seen it. You have to, whatever word you want to call it, judgment, or some people call it, you mentioned wisdom, discernment. I mean, if you're not making some choices or saying this is wholesome or unwholesome, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, just kind of go with the flow. I mean, it'd be great if we can just go with the flow and it'd work, but I don't. I think the Buddha explicitly said that doesn't work. So
yeah, it just flows straight to the hell realms.
Yeah, I would say that just maybe the fine line would be between judgment and speculation. So then we can easily assume things like, for example, when people start going, oh, that person definitely has bad karma because of blah, 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 like a bunch of different speculation, or they will have that particular destination, blah, 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 etc., etc. That is not kind of grounded in Dhamma, but rather it's grounded in speculation. And so we see also in the suttas that the Buddha actually to the lay follower Vikasala says precisely that. Don't say that. Don't be foolish. Don't say those things. Only one like me can actually understand precisely, for example, the causality of karma and what is dependent on that. So it's good for us to have an understanding of causality. And to distinguish, of course, the wholesome from the unwholesome, but not start speculating on, oh, that person is, experiencing X, Y, and Z because of their past karma or this and that. And like we know what they did in the past, we can just focus on ourselves. Maybe that's a little bit easier, more productive. And so in that case, we want to be, as actually Bhante Buddhakita says, maybe we want to aspire at the non-judgment day rather than judgment day. Yeah.
I was thinking, I think maybe the underlying tone is judgmentalism, which is usually referring to like that kind of harsh, critical, fault-finding, never good enough kind of mentality.
Mhm.
And I think, I know, I can speak for myself. I mean, I definitely have a pretty kind of a pretty strong habitual tendency towards that. And I think a lot of people do, not everybody, but a lot of people do. And it's worth, exploring it. I'm sure if you practice meditation, you try to ignore it, and that may or may not work. But some things that can help is for myself, is actually being curious, like actually interacting with them, like just asking questions, like, oh, like what do you hope to accomplish? Like, what do you want? Um, and or what do you hope to gain, or what do you hope to do with this? And just trying to make it more simple and basic. Usually the judgmentalism is so focus on somebody else or yourself. It's like, do you want this person to be different? What would that be like? And trying to, so that's one way, just trying to interact. Or I remember people at the monastery, one of the monasteries I used to live in, they would say, like, trying to almost use humor, if you can. It may not, because it might be kind of overwhelming for your mind, but if you can, like, trying to poke fun at the situation. Just try to up it. So if it's like, oh yeah, that person is this and that, it's like, oh yeah, really. Just like really kind of almost exaggerated. Just really kind of go over the top and see how it responds. So I would encourage people to try, if they have this tendency, to try to experiment with different things and see what happens.
Excellent. Thank you, Venerable. And does anyone have experience concerning Kasina meditation? Which color to choose? I definitely don't practice it, so.
And I experimented with Kasina meditation briefly for a period of time, but I never did much with it. And the main reason for that is because with Kasina meditation, it's usually the instruction is that it's very important to have a teacher who is also very experienced with Kasina meditation. So I only know of a couple of teachers these days who are teaching Kasina meditation. What are your thoughts? Do you have any experience with Kasina?
I've tried, but I hadn't had any luck with Kasina.
Yeah, it's actually what I've heard is that it's, for most people, it's really not a particularly effective practice. But there's Ajahn Sona apparently does teach Kasina meditation. He's one of the few contemporary teachers I know of who does.
So monastics in the Pawak tradition seem to be part of the it's very emphasized in the Pawak method, I've heard. So they might also be teaching that. And Joseph says hello. It's your friend.
Oh.
Hello back. Frank says, I've spent years meditating and reading mainstream books on mindfulness. Then I had an experience I couldn't explain. It left me hungry for deeper understanding. But where to start? Bhante?
I'm like, it's great. Keep going.
Well, I recommend visiting some Buddhist monasteries, talking with monks, and I also recommend reading books by Buddhist monks. If you want to go deeper, then go to the root, go to the ancient tradition stretching back to the Buddha, and that's best preserved in the monastic orders.
Great, thank you. And Sara says, are you chanting in Pali? Do you have a CD you would recommend and books to read? We do chant in Pali at Empty Cloud Monastery, but we don't have a CD, nor are planning on doing anything of that sort anytime soon. But I would definitely recommend actually the chanting that is offered on the Abhayagiri Monastery in California. They have some beautiful chanting of the monastics there, and that you can download. And they also have a karaoke chanting, if they're still on there, which is very cute. So you can like learn how to chant together with the monks. It's very cute. You did not know?
Well, if I think I was the one who did that, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, sad.
I'm surprised it's still.
sad,
I'm surprised it's
sad.
still up.
It was a
Mhm.
few, like 1 or 2 years ago.
Mhm.
How great! Wow, now you also know who made it. That's
Well,
so excellent.
I did that actually as a layperson just before I went into the monastery because I use it to learn how to chant.
Ah, that
Yeah.
is so excellent. It makes me really happy. Because I always thought that's so genius. Actually, like what a great instrument. I recommend it to many people.
Oh, good. Glad it's
It's
useful.
quite nice to meet the creator.
Do you want to make more little tools like that?
This becomes monks asking questions to monks. Ah, okay. And Martin asks, so what about judging other people? Good thing to do or not? I think we spoke about that. Yeah. And Jake says, I've noticed that art of the Buddha near end of life does not usually portray him as having features associated with old age. Is this a literal portrayal of how he looked or an artistic decision? Well, pretty much everything that you see about the Buddha is an artistic decision. Sorry to break the news. Actually, also the usual hairstyle that the Buddha is depicted having, also not realistic. Actually, he kind of looked like us, more or less. So apparently it was the influence of the Greeks that actually created statues to begin with. So the first recorded statues that we have actually look very much like Greek statues. And they quite liked curly hair for some reason. So they applied that to the image of the Buddha, and that kind of stayed within the iconography. So you'll see lots of different ways to portray the Buddha according to the different Buddhist countries, Buddhist cultures, and sometimes, for example, the Buddha is more androgynous. Sometimes the Buddha is depicted a little bit in more masculine manner. Sometimes the Buddha seems a little bit more East Asian. Sometimes the Buddha seems more South Asian. Now there's also like, there's definitely the Gandhara Buddhas that are kind of a cross between European and Asian. And then there's some other new representations of the Buddha that have different features altogether. So yeah, you'll see a whole different array. And I would suggest to just, bring to mind whatever brings faith, whatever like inspires you to practice whenever reflecting at the image of the Buddha. I tend to like a lot of the Cambodian and the Indonesian style Buddhas, as well as the Burmese. The Burmese, I also love Burmese Buddhas.
As for the Buddha's features in old age, it actually clearly states in the suttas that when the Buddha got old, he had wrinkled, faded skin, just like most old people. I think he would have looked very peaceful and calm, and he wasn't the least bit bothered about aging. But bodies are still bodies, and bodies do start to get a little bit on the wrinkly and decayed side when they get old.
Christina said, the Buddha said that no god or human would see him after the breaking apart of his body. But can he, the Buddha, see the gods and humans from where he is now? Who wants to take this question?
Oh boy.
Was that a volunteer?
No, that was me passing.
Are you volunteering?
I just answered the one before.
I also answered the one before. So
anyway, the monastery wanted to...
Anyway, technically speaking, the Buddha said that you cannot describe an awakened being as either existing after death, as not existing after death, as both existing and not existing after death, or as neither existing nor not existing after death. So we can't say that the Buddha sees anything from where he is now, because we can't say where he is now, or if he is anywhere now, or if he's both somewhere and not somewhere now. Like, we just can't talk in those terms because the Buddha said it's just not relevant. He said that the concepts of existence and non-existence just are not relevant to awakened beings. So yeah, it's using nonsensical words. It's like saying, what color is that sound? It just doesn't apply.
Thank you, Bante. And Martin says, are there professions or jobs that are not compatible with the Eightfold Path? Can I be a Buddhist and a soldier in the army? Can I be an investment banker? Can I be a policeman? Well, being a potter is compatible. What about being a lawyer, a politician? What are the criteria here? Bante?
Volunteer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there were, and please correct me. I'm gonna forget, but I believe there were 5 activities that the Buddha didn't want people to be involved in the profession. So one of them, of course, is dealing with anything with weapons, making weapons, things like that, poisons. Another is slaves. Another is animals. Another is, there's 2 more.
Intoxicants.
Thank you. Intoxicants.
Let's see, weapons, poisons, animals, slaves, intoxicants.
And maybe that's all 5.
Maybe that's all 5.
Okay. I thought there might be one more. But, I would, go off, maybe extend that. And you just have to, if you're unsure, right? Let's say you're in a profession and you're unsure about it, then it's good to ask yourself, well, why am I unsure about this? What's actually arising while you're working? Do you find yourself having to engage in breaking precepts to actually do the job? Or do you actually, say, while you're doing it or after you're doing it, do you feel remorseful? Those are good signs that maybe, I wouldn't say maybe, those are good signs that this is not a wholesome activity.
Great. Thank you, Venerable. And Chad asks, I have a question about meditation. When I maintain awareness of my body, I instinctively imagine a 3D image of my body in my mind. Is that good or bad? Well, so when one is developing awareness of the body, what we want to develop is not necessarily images of the body, but an awareness. Like, for example, if right now I go like that, right, there's a sort of physical sensation. It's not that I'm projecting like an image of the body in my mind, but rather I'm like, whoa, that sensation is really evident. I'm aware of it, right? There is perhaps is pain. There's perhaps some kind of really strong tingling sensation and so forth. So of course we shouldn't be hitting ourselves while we're doing meditation. That's not what I'm suggesting. But sometimes that, just hitting ourselves lightly can kind of give us a bit of an idea of what being aware of something actually really means, rather than projecting, visualizing something that can actually tend to bring more spaciness in the mind, more confusion, more unawareness of our actual experience of the body. I don't know if my other brothers in the Dhamma have different perspectives. Okay. And Kim asks, what is Kasina meditation?
So it's a style of meditation where one visualizes usually a particular color, or there's a few other ones like the light, visualizing light, and some others. But it's you visualize it and you focus your mind on the mind-made image. So it's a way of developing concentration. As I mentioned before, it's something that should be done under the careful guidance of an experienced teacher of Kasina meditation. It's not something to do on your own.
Thank you. And Rick asks, recently I have tried listening to Gentle Rain ASMR to help improve my sleep. I think on a machine, maybe.
It's like relative, as far as I know, relatively new idea of like really quiet sounds. Like I think
Okay,
there's
like a sound machine.
like like people whispering or
Okay.
like real quiet.
When I was not able to sleep, I tried lying meditation, focusing on the breath with a gentle awareness of the sound. I experienced some interesting results. Do you have any guidance on meditating on sound in general or listening to ASMR while meditating?
Never done ASMR, but yeah, I mean, if I'm not sure exactly what you mean by interesting results, but if one rubric for any activity, whether it's a meditative activity or reflective activity or physical activity, whatever it is, and this is something that a teacher of or preceptor of Bhante Siddhasa of the mind like to say is this activity increasing wholesome qualities of mind or wholesome emotions of the mind? Is it decreasing unwholesome qualities of mind and decreasing unwholesome emotions or habits? And so that's one way you can always test to see whatever your activity is, it actually helpful, worthwhile, beneficial. So you can use that to gauge whether this activity you're doing in sleeping is a worthwhile thing.
Excellent, thank you. And Martin says, which role does ecology play in Buddhist ethics? Lord Buddha says, don't take what's not given to you. Well, what we do in Western societies is we take natural resources, air, water, which are needed by the next generations, and we consume them. Everybody knows going by car, flying, it destroys the climate. It causes global warming. So to what extent is it okay to fly by airplane, or should we try doing without? Well, I would like to say that we also do that in Eastern societies, Northern societies, Southern societies. To a certain extent, that's also why actually the teachings of the Buddha apply to every single, every single being really on the planet. We all have that tendency towards chasing, craving, taking. And it's never enough. It's never enough. It's never enough. And the reason also why we're experiencing so much disaster is actually that overall, human beings have never had it so much greater in terms of sort of kind of abundance of requisites, so to speak, abundance of food, abundance of globally, actually, like there's so much that we have. We tend to, read the news and read all the horrible news, but we also don't read the good news in terms of like all the incredible, sort of material wealth that there is in the world that is somewhat unprecedented in history. And of course, up until very recently, we're thinking, well, okay, everything is horrible because there's this lack of material wealth pretty much everywhere, or stability of material wealth, or that material wealth is only accessible to the pinnacle, the high sort of part of society. But as we have somewhat enlarged that pinnacle, as we have somewhat created a lot of wealth for many people, we still have that unsatisfactoriness of that experience, that even though perhaps we have food on the table and perhaps we have this and that, we're still not happy. Actually, even when we see the meter of happiness in the countries, we were talking about that a few days ago, it's always usually the meter is how much sort of rights and how much economical stability there is in the country and the welfare and this and that. But it's not necessarily really talking about how much people are happy. Rarely actually they talk about Bhutan being the happiest country in the world. And it's actually materially very, very poor. It's rich in Dhamma, though. But anyway, so to a certain extent, we need to understand that that's essentially Dharma practice. We're trying to first and foremost understand that first noble truth, the truth of that there is dukkha, and the second noble truth, the cause of that dukkha, to understand that that is not exclusive to one particular group of people, but that is just a human condition. And then there is the great news that there is a cessation of suffering and there is the way out of suffering. When it comes to ecology, there's obviously we're destroying our planet, so it's quite dreadful what we're doing. So my understanding is that we can try our best to reduce as much as possible our impact on our environment, our impact on our communities, our impact in general. And this, even if there weren't climate change, would be a really good idea. So actually, that's what we do with, or at least that's what the instructions, for example, that the Buddha gives us with the rope. From a rope, when we can't use the rope anymore, then we tear it in pieces, and it becomes, maybe little bathing cloths, and from the bathing cloth, then it becomes a little rag to clean up, and then you can repurpose it. So it's not just one. It doesn't have one kind of only purpose. And to that extent, then I think what we should try to avoid is being a little bit unrealistic. So thinking that we will have zero impact. Well, unfortunately, just by the fact of existing in this world as human beings with this body, we're constantly even, unintentionally killing lots of sentient beings when we take a walk, for example. So there's that. We need food, we need to move around. So having zero impact is impossible. So between zero impact and crazy impact, there is quite an in-between. And so we can try to reduce our harm. And so now we're taking a plane, actually, Bhante Sudaso and I, on Monday, and we're going to Italy. And we'll be sharing the Dhamma. I think that's a very good way to, make the most out of perhaps the unwholesomeness that can be caused as an environmental decision. There's the impact on the climate, but then there's the immense impact of sharing the Dhamma that can have with many different sentient beings. So sometimes we can focus only on one thing and discard the second, but the world is a little bit more complex, I would say. Anything else that you want to share?
One thought. I actually really appreciate this question. I think from anything, it shows to me. It actually at least it communicates care, and I think one of the things that I've seen, kind of dipping my toes and seeing kind of what's going on in the modern world, since I've been in the Iron Age for quite a long time, and well, actually the last couple of years I've been dipping in and trying to find out what's going on. One of the things that I think that's unfortunate, what I sense is it's almost like it almost feels like talking about things, just discussing things, kind of what we're doing here, is being eroded. And I don't have a very good articulate way of putting that, but there's a way of sort of like where people are not being able to listen to each other and be able to communicate with each other. And I think that's actually really important not to try doing that. In other words, to keep trying to find ways of communicating what we're feeling and seeing and also finding ways of listening to others. There's no simple way out of the mess that humanity is in right now, but the degree that people can try to listen to each other, try to communicate, try to come up with creative ways of addressing these, very serious issues that are going on right now, is going to be the difference between, massive amounts of suffering and a lot of suffering and less suffering. So it's worth putting effort into this, and I think that it's important for ourselves that we, can express ourselves in ways that feel right and fulfilling, in here. Just flailing in the wind is not good. Similarly, like ignoring things is not good. So it's going to, for people that do care, and I'm hearing that from you. It's good actually to bring this up. It's actually a really good question. I do think there's a role. I know that a lot of monks have done things, for example, to protect forests, and done things. I know Ajahn Shatito has actually been talking and writing about this subject, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know too much about it, but it's worth engaging in. So I appreciate what you're saying. I don't have too much more to say other than it. I'm definitely interested in listening to you or anybody else has to say on something like this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Venerable. And Rix asked, does the Buddha offer guidance on the skillful versus unskillful use of money, borrowing, saving, etc.?
Well, actually, one thing which comes to mind is there is a place in the suttas where the Buddha talks about how lay people should use money. And he says that the first use of money is to take care of yourself and your family. And then the next use is to make gifts to friends, to teachers, to monastics, to religious contemplatives, and then to make donations to charity to support society as a whole. So that's the main thing the Buddha had to say on the subject. As for borrowing and saving and so on, I actually don't remember him going into any detail on those sorts of issues. There's a number of places where he uses being in debt as a metaphor for unpleasant states of mind. So that seems to imply he wasn't a big fan of being in debt. It's also being in debt is one of the things that can prevent one from becoming ordained. So as far as borrowing, I would be careful about borrowing money. Saving, I can't remember him going into detail on the topic. Do you know
I have some memory that there was a sutta where he describes if like you're doing a business, you should save 1/4 for yourself and save 1/4 for the future and give away something of that sort. I don't quite have the right proportions, but something along those lines. I just can't recall what he said exactly, but it's something like that.
That does sound familiar.
Okay. And Anjan asks, I hear that intellectualization of Dhamma is not good and it should be experiential, but I have not understood this well. May I request you to give a couple of examples? Well, sometimes we get really wrapped up into our heads. So it's important to understand that the Dhamma is not just an intellectual exercise, but it's something that is meant to really remove suffering from our minds, like really destroy suffering. So of course it's we can talk about all the suttas that we want, we can talk about all the great masters that we want, we can learn all the different languages in which the texts have been transmitted. We can learn all the Abhidhamma and then impress other people or destroy people in conversations by like, wow, like you look at my knowledge and I can remember even the page and the comma. What about you? You suck. You're terrible. And like not make one inch of progress on the path. So to a certain degree, it's no different than learning so much about math, for example, and then, you know, someone asks you to buy 3 oranges at the supermarket and you're like, I don't know how to count actually. What is 3 oranges? So what is the purpose of all of that? I mean, it's cute, like little exercise to, you know, talk about these things, but when experientially, when on the practical level, we're actually not using anything, we're not using these teachings, then it's, yeah, I mean, wouldn't call it a waste of time because it's still better than nothing. But yeah, I think that's time to perhaps close the book and actually then really understand what the Buddha says. You know, all he ever taught was, this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the end of suffering, and this is the way out of suffering. So that's what we should be experiencing. We should be looking at, what is suffering? How am I experiencing suffering? What is the cause of suffering? How do I end this? Like, is this practice, is this medicine that the Buddha is giving me actually leading me towards the cessation of suffering? And that's when it's something experiential. That is when it's something is actually useful, beneficial. So, you know, even believing in the Dhamma, it's good to a certain extent. Like, it's not something even that necessarily we should just believe in. It's something that we need to do. We practice it. That's why we use also these terms. It's like, oh, I believe in math. Who says that? It's really bizarre, no? Like, okay, great, good for you. I guess that you believe in math and you believe in physics or whatever. Like, we need to have a bit of a different kind of attitude towards the Dhamma in order for it to be useful.
I always think of some of our lay supporters that come, you know, like marking, like as our lay supporters, like they're really living the Dhamma. You see the Dhamma being lived in those things.
Yeah, a lot of, actually, thank you for bringing that up, actually, Samandira Matiko. A lot of friends that are born Buddhist, actually, we were having a conversation with our friend Benz, who was saying, oh, well, you know, I actually don't know anything about the Dhamma. I just do these things because they are traditional. I was like, no, don't say that. Actually, you're just having an easier time. Because instead of opening the book and going like, hey, how do I actually be generous? What's the point of this? Why should I be doing this and that? And like, you know, having all that kind of difficulty towards even offering something or bowing. It just comes naturally and creates those conditions for beauty in the mind. So perhaps a lot of people who are in fact born Buddhist have never actually really opened and studied or used too much the brain to figure out things, but they've used the heart. And by using the heart, then they actually transform all their behaviors and they're capable of embodying and practicing the Dhamma, which is of great inspiration for many beings, including myself. I always say that, you know, I have many ajahns in my life and not all of them have robes. There's many lay people that actually are so incredibly inspiring. They don't teach by the book, but they teach by embodying the Dhamma, and it's really, really beautiful. And Anthony, did you have something? Or...
Oh no, I was just quietly going silent.
Oh, okay, great. Excellent. And oh, this is the person. Thumbs up says, I am Amy. In deep sleep, we lose mental awareness of the body, of ourselves, and of the world. Is this unconsciousness also part of us? Bhante, do you have any reflections that come to mind?
Boy, in deep sleep, we lose mental awareness of the body, of ourselves, and of the world. Is this unconsciousness also part of us? I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Is she saying like, like when we're sleeping, we lose a lot of our consciousness. So, but there's still part of it that's conscious. Is that what she's saying, or what do you think? I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, actually, I was inclined to say that nothing is part of us. So also awareness is not part of us. It's just something which happens under certain conditions. And when those conditions change, then consciousness disappears. So deep sleep is a period of time where consciousness disappears for a period of time. So sometimes consciousness is present and sometimes it isn't. But when it's present, it's also not part of us. It's just a function of the natural world.
Excellent. Thank you. Martin says, yes, but 10% of mankind consume 90% of the resources. Yes, so it's quickly kind of...
the problem is when the other 90%
catching up.
Yeah, when the other 90% start using that 810% of the resources, then we're going to have problems.
That bad habit that everybody kind of like, that bad train that everybody's trying to hop on instead of like
everyone wants
the other
to
way
be
around.
America, but if everyone's America, then the planet's going to be a barren wasteland pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it is what it is, and we'll see. Jay Kalaf says, have any particular Mahayana sutras made a strong impact on your practice or understanding of the Dhamma?
Yes, the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra was very transformative for me in certain ways. Yeah.
For you, Venerable, Mahayana sutras?
No. I'm actually not very familiar with many of the Mahayana sutras.
Read the Diamond Sutra. It's great. Yeah.
I like the Heart Sutra.
Heart Sutra is also really good. Yeah.
And Jazod says, when I think of the impermanence and suffering of things, I feel sad. I'm already picturing the end of my new relationship. How do I live with an open heart and be brave knowing it will end?
It's actually, well, I know you're not going to like to hear this, but it's actually good that you're recognizing this. It's because you're seeing the truth of it. That it, there's this end of your new relationship. You're recognizing there's some parts about it that you enjoy, you like. It's enjoyable, fulfilling, pleasant. But you also recognize that when it ends, it's going to be painful, distressing, depressing. Use the word. What did she say? She didn't say. But it's going to be unpleasant at the very least in some ways. And that's actually not to be feared. It's like what you're actually experiencing. You're doing it right now. If you're actually being willing to recognize these feelings, you already have an open heart. I think probably one thing that I find helpful, or I found helpful in the past. This is when I'm thinking back when I was a layperson a long time ago. Former life. that I remember, like being on the. I used to live in San Francisco, and I would often take public transportation, like buses, the BART system, which is kind of like a subway system there. And I remember, looking around sometimes. A lot, I think that's these days everybody's looking at their phone. I don't even know what people are doing these days. But back then, only some people were looking at their phones. And so I would, sometimes look around, and there's a bunch of people like me, some younger, some older, some the same age. And I started to think about, wait a minute, like all these people experience, similar things that I do. They have relationships, they have family. People go, they disappear in their life for one reason or another. They move away, or people pass away. we all have to, all of us experience loss. And for whatever reason, seeing that and like putting that out there and actually looking at this person, I'm looking at this person, looking at this person, going, oh wow, like I don't know this person, but they probably have already experienced loss. And if they haven't yet, they're almost certainly going to, right? And when you just start to like make that very real, all of a sudden, at least I found for myself, I felt like, oh, like I can do this. Like I can be with difficult emotions too. 'Cause they have to deal with difficult emotions, so do I. And that made it a lot more real. I mean, and this is something that you actually like. It's you can't just like think about it. I mean, maybe some people can, but actually like being around other people and actually like really making it as real as possible. Yeah, these people experience loss too, and that really helped me. So I hope that um, gives some advice. I don't know if the Venerables have anything they want to add.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Martin says, follow up to ecology. What's your criterion here? 1 flight per year, okay? 10 flights, okay? Do you have a criterion, a limit? I love how you're very practical, Martin.
I was seriously considering, I was in Brazil recently and I did fly back. I flew there and back. But I was actually seriously considering kind of like along the lines you're saying, because, you know, I recognize the situation's going on. I was like, do I want to take a strong determination of not flying, for example? You know, and I actually started researching like, you know, like boat rides and things like that. Things like this exist, you know, or walking. You know, this is actually one of the. I remember talking to. There's one monk that I know that he's, you know, really interested in trying to follow like, you know, like as many of the kind of I would say the kind of like the sort of the most original life that the Buddha laid down back in the old days. And the way he's like really thinking about this is that he wants to walk whenever possible. Like just a lot of, for example, we you know, people offer us rides, we take the rides. But you know, he's like, no, you know, I'm thinking like, I don't want to take any rides, you know, unless I'm like, you know, like horizontal. I don't want to take any rides, you know. And you know, so you know, these kind of things actually can be quite good to think about and take on. You know, and it's actually something I'm still playing around in my mind. I haven't done it yet, but it's actually good for all of us to think about. You know, what can we do? Maybe it's not necessarily not taking a flight, but maybe it's, for example, well, what can I do to help out, right, in some way? And so these are actually good things for all of us to think about. So yeah, I wouldn't get too fixated on like on, you know, everybody just has to not take flights, because yeah, that's you know, that's probably just going to make you or other people around you miserable. But it's actually good to think about and good to talk with others about.
And planting trees. That's a very good thing. We love planting trees here. Jay Kala says, Bhante Sudaso mentioned being inspired by Mahayana Bodhisattvas in his practice. Any thoughts on the mix between that and the sutta approach? Some ideas about them seem to vary from the suttas. Bhante?
I'm not aware of any problem here. So maybe if you can explain what you think varies from the suttas, then we can talk about that. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any problems.
Okay. Sud says, Dear Venerables, is there a way to donate for Katina, Chirava ceremony at your monastery from afar for those who are not able to attend to participate? Sud, you don't live that far away. Come on. you can come for the day. You can also email the monastery, and Benz will let you know how to. But we would really love to see you and your family on Sunday. So please try to come. And Chad says, I believe that would be the Sigalovada Sutta that speaks about saving money. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's in the Digha Nikaya. That's actually a really good sutta for lay people who want a more detailed guide to life, more detailed than the 5 precepts. The Sigalovada Sutta has a lot of useful advice for lay practitioners. So more refined morality for lay practitioners.
And Martin says, I like the issue of money. We tend to think money is the storage of value, but during the inflation, it loses the value so fast. So there's a lesson of anatta in it. There is no real substance in money or in anything. Actually, I like that. That's great.
That's
I'm going to
true.
totally
Yeah.
steal that. And Martin says, when it said that, I believe the Dhamma, not the Dham, the Dhamma should be experiential. That's the principle of a Pasiko, right? Maybe you might want to elaborate on this. Maybe one of the two venerables.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually tend to think of it in terms of food. So if you're hungry and you read a book about food, you're still hungry. But you might have some more information about what foods are healthy and what foods to minimize or avoid, but you're still hungry. And so then you read another book about food and you learn a bit more, but you're still hungry. In fact, you're even hungrier. At some point, you need to actually go out and eat something. But the opposite extreme is actually if you don't read anything at all and you just like try to spend your entire life eating nothing but cheese, then that's also not so great. This more is in terms of the whole intellectual versus experiential approach to Dhamma. This is more how I think about it. Like when you study the Dhamma, you actually do need to learn a little bit of the intellectual side of Dhamma because otherwise you don't actually know how to practice. Again, like somebody who knows nothing about nutrition, they might do foolish things like try to live entirely on cheese. But at the same time, if you just spend all your time reading books about food and never actually eat anything, then your hunger will never go away. In fact, it will just keep getting worse. So this also, again, as far as the experiential aspect of the Dhamma, it means like actually applying what the Buddha spoke about to our lives. So that means changing our habits, changing our ways of thinking, changing our ways of speaking, changing our ways of acting. And in so doing, then yes, you will see that the Buddha was right. Because you will see how following his advice reduces our suffering, increases our wisdom, increases our compassion, leads to a happier and more peaceful life. And that's what ehipassiko means. It means come and see. So ehi means come and passa means see. So ehipassiko means come and see. It's something that you can come and see for yourself. So in the same way, like again, if I tell you eating food takes away your hunger, well, I mean, that's true as far as I'm concerned, but you won't actually know for sure until you eat something and your hunger goes away. Then you'll know.
Great, thank you, Ante. And Sud says, Dear Venerables, is it fair to say that 90% of our dukkha ends when we stop taking life so personally and so seriously? Though, of course, working on good qualities is beneficial. Any thoughts?
I don't know if 90%, but yeah, a lot. It's worth mentioning that the Buddha had a project in mind when he was teaching others, and he wanted people to become enlightened, become awakened. And at the same time, the path generally leads to step by step to, if carried out correctly, leads to deeper and more sustainable forms of happiness. And so the degree that one, sees things in a way that it sort of makes that kind of sense of self not so solid, degree that sense of self starts to fall away, that where the sense of self starts to be seen through, the mind is just going to be happier and happier.
Sadhu. And Rick says, cause-like conditions have created the feeling of being desperately driven to continuously accomplish things in the world. This has been an impediment to settling down in meditation or being at peace in daily life. Do you have any guidance on letting go of feeling driven? I don't understand. Causes and conditions have created the feeling of being desperately driven to continuously accomplish things in the world. This has been an impediment to settling down in meditation and being at peace in daily life. Do you have any guidance on letting go of feeling driven? Getting right to the heart. Maybe that's why I was not understanding, because I was yeah, the syndrome of getting stuff done. There's so much sukha in getting stuff done, and so much dukkha afterwards, because then you've done the thing that you were supposed to do. Then you get back to it. So yeah, first and foremost, we need to understand that whatever kind of habit, whatever kind of tendency of mind that we have and that we repeatedly do, most likely there is, actually without a doubt, there is gratification in it. So identifying the gratification, realizing the gratification is something very important. Like, how does that gratification manifest in our mind? Even if, for example, we're prone to anger, we might actually be rushing towards just labeling the anger as this awful thing. So only seeing the drawbacks of anger and not actually focusing on the fact that there is a gratification in being angry, especially if you're right. Wow, that's like so delicious. The righteous indignation of being right. Wow, is the most sweet nectar that you can have. It's just really delicious. There is gratification. If there weren't gratification, we wouldn't be crazy to actually take on this big jug of poison, right? So there is, as the Buddha says, it's the honey tip with the poison root. So we have to acknowledge both the gratification of the honey and the drawback of the poison root. And then understand, how is it that we get back into that habit? Why do we do the same thing over and over again? As we're doing it, we're like, oh, okay, this is how it manifests. I'm totally looking at the honey without taking into consideration the poison root. So then as our understanding of what we're doing becomes clear, and we see that we're constantly looking for essentially happiness in this diluted way, then it's easier to try something else, to become a little bit dispassionate from whatever we're engaging in, and be capable of, well, relinquishing the desire of getting angry, relinquishing the desire of chocolate, relinquishing the desire of getting stuff done, whatever it is that is, our big defilement. By doing this process and acting upon it, then it just becomes less. We'll be less deluded about what we're doing, essentially. So this is what comes to mind, but I don't know if the other venerables have other ideas or something else to share.
Just relax. and seriously, like, what's the big deal? What are you trying to do? Like, what is any of this actually going to bring you happiness and peace of mind and wisdom? So that's something to really ask yourself. Like, so you want to achieve something, well, okay, whatever. But ask yourself, if you actually achieve it, is it going to make you more Buddha-like? If the answer is no, then maybe don't waste your time. Or if you are going to go for it, do so in a calm, relaxed, happy manner where you don't actually care whether or not you achieve it or not. It's kind of like, well, yeah, I'll give it a shot and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but who cares? Because either way, it doesn't have anything to do with becoming like the Buddha.
Yeah, and observing once you get what you want. The dukkha of getting what you want is actually a really powerful dukkha. Because, when we don't get what we want, we still can indulge in that delusion. Like, I so totally would be happy if I was in a different place, or I'd totally be happy if I were in Italy, for example. I could say right now. Then in 2 days, I'm in Italy and I'm like, oh God, it sucks. I would be so happy if I could be at Empty Cloud Monastery. So looking at the dukkha of getting what we want, and that we're constantly searching, like it always repeat. That's also like a rebirth right there. We tend to think so much about future lives and past lives, but we have so many past lives and future lives constantly. And we're constantly going in this loop, rebirth, 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 and we always have the same idea. Oh, new thing. Oh, empty cloud. Oh, Italy. Oh, empty cloud. Oh, Italy. So we have to laugh about it, and kind of like that's also how the dispassion comes into being in our mind. And Martin says, Jazzul's question, I think about the love before, is great. It's so great. There is a tension between being a Buddhist and being romantic. Would you dare telling your girlfriend, this is going to end? Well,
actually, if she was Buddhist, that might work. By the way, the flip side of this is the Buddha who he gave advice to a couple on how to stay together in future lives. So there was a married couple who were really deeply in love with each other, and they went to the Buddha and they asked, how can we be together in future lives as well? And the Buddha, very compassionately, he didn't tell them, this is hopeless, you're all just going to inevitably separate and go your own different ways. And he says that in a million other suttas. But on this occasion, what he did was he actually gave them advice on exactly how to continue their relationship in future lives, which I think is very kind and compassionate of the Buddha. But yeah, absolutely. Like, everything is impermanent, and that includes romantic relationships. They can still be good things while they last. They can be very powerful training ground for developing compassion, thoughtfulness, consideration, patience, tolerance, equanimity, patience, tolerance, equanimity. And so they can actually be a very powerful training ground for wholesome states, but they can also be a breeding ground for delusion, attachment, craving, self-centeredness. So if you're going to be involved in romantic relationships, then you do need to approach them carefully. Ask yourself, how can I approach this relationship in a way which nurtures wholesome qualities and in a way which doesn't fuel unwholesome qualities? And that's a much more challenging way to approach things. But one element of that actually is keeping in mind that all things do eventually come to an end. So if you're attached to the relationship, and especially if you're attached to the way it is right now, because everything changes. So maybe right now your relationship is a particular way, but in a few days or months or years, it's going to be something quite different. So watch that tendency of mind to get fixated on how things are now, because it's always evolving. It's always changing. So part of being in a relationship is having that commitment to trying to be a support to each other, even when both of you are constantly changing and the relationship between the two of you is constantly changing. How can you still be caring and supportive to each other? That's a real challenge. And yeah, of course, inevitably it comes to an end, because that's the nature of all things.
Thank you, Bhante. And Diane asks, the Buddha spoke a lot about honoring parents, but I grew up in an abusive household. Best I can do is not have ill will, and that took a while. Would this generate bad karma for me? Okay.
Well, I don't. My intuition is, if you're making good efforts to, it sounds like you're no longer generating ill will towards your parents, and you're making efforts towards that. That seems like really wholesome, good comment to me. It's pretty normal. For humans, probably animals too. If somebody mistreats us, abuses us, attacks us, that anger or other unwholesome thoughts can come to mind, or it can come out in words or actions. And so, the thought that comes to mind is to to be very patient with yourself, and understanding that you as a being need a lot of care in this process, and and just understanding that something like this isn't going to, sort of miraculously change anytime soon. I mean, I guess it could, but it's really important from my experience to give your situation a lot of time. And also, I'll even go as far as to say, like, acknowledge the possibility that maybe your emotions will never maybe be a place where you want them to be. Maybe you see other children, and they might have a lot of devotion and love toward their parents. You might envy them. You go, wow, I wish I could feel that way towards my parents. And to give yourself that, I don't know, the compassion that your emotional world may never be in a place where it can do that. And that, I think, is really important. But at the same time, to keep doing, because you've obviously done a lot already, to a little bit every day, to keep trying to see what you can do to have less and less ill will over time.
And Julie says, we'll bring my cat to the shelter because he's not a good fit for our family and other cat. Generate bad karma for me. I tried to find a new owner to adopt my cat, but not finding any. Whenever it comes to animals that we start taking care of, I think it's very important to, whenever we have questions on how to behave with them, if we start thinking about them as humans. So, for example, children. So if you ask yourself, if your cat was a child and you have two different children and it's not a great fit for your family, well, do you return it? Like, sorry, I want to return this child. Yeah, it's a little bit different whenever we're relating to sentient beings as humans, as when they have a different sort of shape and form. And yeah, there's sometimes humans and animals both can be difficult. And so how do we deal with the situation? So your cat, I would say, is your bodhisattva. So your cat is actually creating the conditions in order for you to practice and to develop wholesome mind states and to figure out what is the best way for the cat for you to solve this situation. What is the appropriate response? So yeah, it can be a little bit difficult. But I remember actually our monastic cat Stan, he died last week, and throughout the past 7 years that he was at our monastery, he met so many different sentient beings that actually all humans that all sent really cute messages and pictures throughout the past days, remembering Stan, and he made such a beautiful impact on them, and how he was such a special cat, etc., etc. But I remember actually when I had met him, he was a cat from hell. He ruined my life for the first couple of months. He was intolerable, grumpy. And my friends were begging me actually to bring him to the shelter. But I was like, well, if I bring him to the shelter, they are going to kill him. So my friends, by the way, were not my venerable friends. They would never tell me to do such a thing. But yeah, so I was like, okay, that's not an option. I can't really send this sentient being to death row. So let me learn everything possible about cats and see if there is a way through which we can solve the situation in a different way. And it turned out quite well. Now he's not remembered as this really crazy, obnoxious cat, but actually as a really lovely sentient being. And Pia says, principle of dependent origination, is this essentially pointing to emptiness in between? When this exists, that comes to be. When with the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases.
Yeah, it's pointing to emptiness. That's one of the fundamental messages of Paticca Samuppada. Actually, I found it very interesting. Several years ago, we had a visiting teacher, I think from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and somebody asked him to explain Paticca Samuppada, and he got this kind of incredulous look on his face, and he was like, "You want me to give a Dhamma talk about emptiness?" Because in his mind, it was just exactly the same thing. Like the two topics were not separate; they were equivalent in his mind. And I think this is actually quite wise. So recognizing that, pointing to the fact that sankharas only exist in dependence upon other sankharas is another way of indicating that all sankharas are inherently empty. So yeah, definitely Paticca Samuppada is about emptiness. It's about emptiness and causality.
Okay. And thank you, Bante. And Jaikala asks, what did you say when people asked you why you were ordaining? Particularly non-family who want a more succinct answer. A treatise on the dukkha of samsara is sometimes too much for people. Venerable, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, the succinct answer is I was more and more interested in meditation in Buddhism, and I was less and less interested in the worldly things I was chasing before.
Yeah, same. Yeah, what he said, that was, yeah, same.
I think I also said something along those lines, but I also said, no, I'm not interested in having children. That's it. And Kristen says, I was learning how to pray for others in chaplaincy class today and wondering what venerables think about the power of prayer chanting. Something?
I think that's one way of practicing metta. So praying for somebody else or chanting for somebody else is a way of generating the really sincere wish for that person to be happy, healthy, and safe. So it's a way of generating metta. And I personally do believe that it does have a actual effect on other people. There's also some research that indicates this. But whether it does or doesn't, the fact that it has an effect on your own mind is already enough reason to do it.
Excellent. And the rainbow says, according to Buddhism, what is the way to defeat ignorance? I really wish to know how I can help bring more peace to the world. The Noble Eightfold Path. That's the way to approach it. And that's the last question for tonight. Really great question. And you're all welcome to come to our Katina ceremony on Sunday. And if we won't see you on Sunday, well, we will see you online in December personally, the two of us, but there were other, and hopefully actually the three of us maybe, if you're lucky enough that Venerable Jagaro will return here in December. But in the meanwhile, there will be different venerables coming in at Empty Cloud. So Ayya Sudina will be leading actually the live streams next week. Ayya Sudina is a senior bhikkhuni, originally from Sri Lanka, and really wonderful practitioner. So she will be sharing lots of Dhamma gems. And then after Ayya Sudina, there will be Bante Sumita, who will be returning at Empty Cloud for the whole month of November. So you will always be able to have lots of different opportunities to learn the Dhamma and ask questions. All right, so we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu.